Around 100, this whole generation is born. Julius Caesar and Cicero are contemporaries, also Pompey, also Lucretius, the great writer of De Natura. And then in the 80s and the 70s, we have two dictators, and also we have a crisis, a revolt of slaves under Spartacus. And then by 70, Pompey's been elected a consul. And in the 60s, he's 30-something, 31 or 2. Caesar goes to Spain to be an official, brings about order. He has a military position also. He stops in front of a statue of Alexander the Great and laments that he's done so little. He's in his 30s at the age when Alexander already conquered the world. He marries Pompeia, the granddaughter of the dictator Sulla. That gives him an in. These quotations here are from Cicero. Cicero was a brilliant wit in Latin, but his brilliant wit got him in trouble because it was always so funny that everybody then repeated it. And then when the person about whom the witticism was made heard who'd said it, they would get mad at him. So this is a famous one that he made about Caesar. I'll let you look it up in your own Latin scholarship and figure it out at home and chuckle. In any case, Pompey ends up getting a divorce because of adultery with Caesar. You'd think that they'd be mad at each other the rest of their lives. They're not. They have a partnership coming ahead. Cato, the man I mentioned to you, hates Julius Caesar because of Servilia, which is a fascinating story because they were young people, they were teenagers, and they fell in love, and there's no question Caesar and Servilia had what was certainly a unapproved of relationship for which there was a child born, and that child was a boy, and his name became Brutus. Now, Servilia was married, so she could, claim that it was with her husband, but it was really with Caesar. So when we think of 44 and Ides of March, it's that moment when he looks up and realizes that Brutus, his son, is also in the middle of assassinating him. That's when he says, "And you, my son, Brutus." And that's why that quotation is so famous. It's been forgotten in history books, but in the world of Cicero and Pompey and Caesar, everybody knew about Servilia. Caesar and Servilia were in love, and I think they stayed in love for the rest of their lives. They were both married to other people, but there's a famous incident in the Senate. Caesar is addressing the Senate, and he gets a note. They bring it into him, and so Cato, who hates Caesar, screams at him, "Read it, read it, read it. Read the note," thinking it's a conspiracy or something. And so Caesar tries to defer, and Cato's yelling at him, "Read it." So he reads out this passionate love letter from Servilia, and Cato's enraged. Imagine how embarrassed he is. Servilia had a daughter named Tertia, which means the third. And all these guys we're talking about, Pompey crowd, they're all at an auction. Romans loved auctions, and it's big stuff, art and things. And so the auctioneer does a price, and Caesar gets something at the auction for a huge discount. The auctioneer sells it to him, and everybody in the room is saying, "How did he get it so cheap?" And Cicero says, "Tertia deducta." Now, that can mean a third off, or it could mean it's Servilia's daughter. Isn't that brilliant? They're standing, and this is how brilliant and witty he was. They're standing at the auction, and they're all muttering, saying, "How did he get it so cheap? How did he get it so cheap?" And Cicero says, "Tertia deducta." Later, Servilia marries Cassius, and Cassius hates Caesar, and of course he does, because he knows that Caesar and Servilia are still in love. Everybody in their circle knew it. In the 60s, if you think about it, since we're about to talk about the partnership between the three grand men, we can see Cicero as the fourth man. Now, he's one of the four most powerful Romans, but he doesn't have all the money the other three guys do. He never had a fortune like Caesar did, Pompey did, and Crassus did. He never had a fortune like they did. They got it in various ways. One is a businessman, the other two are military people. But he had an equal power except for that, except for having a huge fortune. So he's a very important person. He can swing towards Pompey, towards Caesar, depending on what happens. In 63, he's chosen to the highest level, like the presidency of Rome, and so he's the consul in the year 63, and he stops what is then called the Catiline conspiracy, named for the man at the center of the conspiracy to overturn the Republic. And for the rest of his life, some people in Rome love him for having saved Rome from the Catiline conspiracy, and then a whole group of people on the other side hate him for having stopped the Catiline conspiracy. So this is one of the most important events in his whole life, is that he's in it, he's the head of the government, he stops it successfully. Then 60s, we come down to Clodius. He's going to tangle with Clodius, who is one of the other key figures in ancient Rome, a very, very sort of disreputable, almost sort of crazy, very, very, very attractive lover guy who's in love with everybody and sleeping with everybody's wife, including Caesar's wife. Now, we don't know whether he did or didn't, but that's the story of Caesar's wife has to be above reproach, so they get a divorce. Cicero makes so many hilarious, gossipy witticisms about Clodius that Clodius turns on him and is going to do everything he can in the next decade to wreck Cicero's life. Here's the first triumvirate, meaning the first triumvirate, the three, Crassus, Caesar, and Pompey. And in the moment of the first triumvirate, we have some great letters from Cicero to Pompey, Pompey to Cicero, Cicero to his friend Atticus in Greece. It's this correspondence with Atticus that's so important, because Atticus is in Athens, so Cicero has to describe to him everything that's happening in Rome, and so we get all these wonderful letters from Cicero in the 60s and the 50s and the 40s, where he's describing every single thing that's happening in Rome. And so the correspondence of Cicero in this period is spectacular. So here's Pompey and Caesar, of course, who goes to Spain and makes a lot of money in Spain. So when he comes back to Rome, he's as rich as Pompey. The two of them have both made a lot of money on a military conquest. And then Crassus has made his money in business. He's the richest man in Rome. And a lot of historians think he's the richest man ever in all of history. A lot of people think that when you figure out the amount of wealth he had at that moment, even Jeff Bezos does not exceed it. Even Jeff. So here's Crassus, who's the third man. He's a businessman, also a politician, also a general, but he's a businessman mainly, and he makes a ton of money on real estate and all kinds of investments pertaining unto that. In the 50s, we all know Caesar's in Gaul. We talked 2 weeks about it. Here's what Cicero said about Caesar in Gaul. It is not the ramparts of the Alps, nor the foaming and flooding Rhine, but the arms and generalship of Caesar, which I account our true shield and barrier against the invasion of the Gauls and the barbarous tribes of Germany. It is to him we owe that should the mountains be leveled with the plain and the rivers dried up, we should still hold our Italy fortified, not by nature's bulwarks, but by the exploits and victories of Caesar. Certainly, the quotation is right in the sense that the actions of Caesar define Europe forever. That is, there'll be a France, there'll be a Spain, and there's going to be an Italy, and all three of those pieces, and then other pieces are going to be defined ever after as per. Here's the other quote from Mommsen that we had 2 weeks ago. So, in the 50s, he's out of Rome, he's in Gaul, he's conquering. Here's the great Gaul general, Vercingetorix, that he will surrender to Caesar and be brought to Rome. And while Caesar's in Gaul, Cicero is going to be essentially destroyed by this powerful, nasty, rich Clodius, who brings about the exile of Cicero. He has to go to a crappy job in Greece and be out of the middle of everything and cut off from everybody. And of course, that's essentially death for the Roman politician. If you're out of Rome, nobody knows who you are. They can't talk to you. They can't see you. So you just disappear from the scene. In a year, attitudes in Rome change. They start to see him as maybe a great leader, and he gets letters to say, come back. So he comes back to Rome. By the time Caesar comes back from Gaul, which is 50, he's back in Rome as one of the key political leaders. So he's in Rome from 49, 48, 47, 46, leading up to the assassination of Caesar. Caesar crosses the Rubicon 49. Here are the letters, some of the letters. These are the great letters because Pompey writes to him. Cicero writes to Atticus telling about Pompey. I'm going to put that on the screen, on the state of Rome and what to do, because he's trying to decide what to do. Go with Caesar, go with Pompey. That's what's happening. Pompey's asking him, come with me. Caesar's saying, come with me. because everybody wants him on their side. He's the extra man. If you didn't get any of these letters, go and read them. They're really a great way to meet Cicero. Here's the letter from Pompey to Cicero. I was glad to read your letter, for I recognized your courage of old in the national interest. He's referring to the Catiline conspiracy. The consuls have joined my army in Apulia. Now, this is when Pompey and Caesar are dividing up. See, it's 49. It's the year 49. So now in Italy, you have a Caesar army in the north, you have a Pompey army in the south, and Rome is in the middle. And all of Rome is facing essentially civil war. So everybody's upset in the capital. So the council have joined my army. I urge you strongly, Mr. Cicero, in the name of your exceptional and unceasing patriotism, to come to us so that we can plan together how to help and rescue our sorely afflicted country. I propose that you should travel by the Appian Way and proceed quickly to Brindisi. Brindisi today on the East Coast. Brindisi, Brindisi. Latin, Brundisium. So there's Pompey writing to him, and of course Cicero was writing similar things. 49 and 48, that's the key critical moment. Caesar's in Rome, Pompey's got an army. Who's going to control Rome? Here's the next letter from Cicero to his friend Atticus in Greece. This is 1 month later, 49. What a disgrace, and consequently what misery. For my own feeling is that disgrace is the ultimate misery, or that maybe the only one. Pompey cherished Caesar, suddenly became afraid of him, refused all peace terms, failed to prepare for war, evacuated Rome, lost Picenum, got himself tied up in Apulia, and then went off to Greece without getting in touch with any of us or letting us know anything about his unprecedented plan upon which so much depended. And now suddenly, this letter and his to the councils. So now we have this new letter demanding that they come over with him. I had almost come to believe that the right thing to do had flashed before his eyes, and that Pompey, the man Pompey ought to be, had cried, "Let them devise their uttermost to meet this occasion. Let them exert their every wile against me. Yet right is on my side." You get the comedy here, the wit? They say it was on hearing this news that Domitius and those with him surrendered. In other words, he's just recounted to us his view of Pompey. Do you all get it from that letter? He can't decide what he's doing. He's indecisive. That's the word, indecisive. That's the worst thing you could be if you're in a civil war. Here it is. What a disgrace. What a disgrace. He cherished Caesar one moment. He suddenly was afraid of him. He refused to sit down and negotiate some kind of a peace. He failed to prepare for war, even though it was clear a war was coming. Then he evacuated Rome. Then he lost another city, and now he's tied up in Apulia. So in 48, Caesar goes to Greece, confronts Pompey at the Battle of Pharsalus, which is up in the north of Greece, and he then escapes and goes to Egypt. Caesar follows him. Caesar comes off the ship at Alexandria, and the Egyptians proudly hand him the head of Pompey on a basket. They think that this is a nice thing they've done. They think that Caesar's going to be delighted to be shown the head of his enemy, whereas they didn't realize that this is not really just his enemy. This has been his friend since they were kids. So he's brokenhearted that he and Pompey are fighting a war, and he's brokenhearted that they hand him the head, because he was, of course, going to pardon Pompey and say, "Go home to Rome and help me unify our country." And Pompey would have said, "Thank you, I'll be glad to." That's what would have happened. So he's weeping. And then, as we know, now, 48, Caesar's in Alexandria in Egypt, and he's settling down from all his troops are out, boats are in the bay, and this lady is brought into his chambers rolled up in a carpet. So here's Cleopatra, the most powerful, the richest woman in the whole of the Mediterranean. There she is. A lot of people think the richest woman ever, but certainly the richest woman in the ancient world. She was phenomenally rich as the head of Egypt. Caesar in Egypt falls in love with Cleopatra. The two of them create a little child, Caesarium, and now he will be like 12 when Augustus comes to Egypt. And then, 47, Caesar goes back to Italy. Cleopatra comes too. And so now Caesar is appointed dictator, given total power for 10 years, not life. And in 45, Cicero decides it's absolute tyranny. Caesar has total power, no reason to stay in Rome, so he leaves. So he pulls out and settles in at his country villa on the east coast of Italy. And while he's there, Caesar stops at the villa on his way back from Egypt and asks if he can stop for dinner. Don't you love that? Julius Caesar is coming to dinner. What should we fix? Here's Cicero's letter. This is one of my absolute favorite letters of his because it's just so fun to think. In December 45, we could hear from Cicero tell us about Caesar's visit to his country house. What a guest! So important, but not bad, for it was really quite pleasant. When he arrived at Philippus' residence, which had been a neighbor, in the evening of the second day of Saturnalia, the house was so teeming with soldiers that there was scarcely a free dining room where Caesar could have dinner, for the troops numbered 2,000. Now, that's right. Caesar arrives at Cicero's villa with 2,000 soldiers. And it's your job to feed them. You're the host. Yeah, you're supposed. Imagine any of you here, a friend of yours comes for dinner, turkey dinner. Oops, I'm bringing 2,000 soldiers. I didn't tell you that. I was worried as to what was to happen the next day when Caesar would visit me here, but Cassius Barba came to my rescue and provided guards, meaning just to keep order. A camp was pitched in the open country, and the house was guarded. Of course, Caesar had guards. On the third day of Saturnalia, he stayed in Philippus' house until an hour after noon, and he let no one in. I think he was working over the accounts. After that, he took a walk on the shore. After 2 o'clock, he had a bath. It was then that he heard about the Battle of Marmara, which was in Spain. But his features remained impassive. After being rubbed down with oil, he reclined at table. He was following a routine of emetics, which allowed him to eat and drink without apprehension. In other words, you can eat all you want because you're going to get rid of it. Lavishly and sumptuously, we enjoyed food well cooked and garnished. Good conversation, if you ask, a pleasant meal. Moreover, the members of his entourage were entertained most lavishly in 3 dining rooms. The less refined freedmen and the slaves enjoyed the full range. As for more sophisticated, I offered them refined fare. In short, I behaved as a civilized host should. But my guest was not the sort to whom you'd say, "Do, please, drop in on me again." It's so wonderful. "Please, on your way back, stop here again." No. Isn't that wonderful to read that letter and to think that you're hearing somebody talk to you from December 45 BC, Cicero and Julius Caesar?